all throughout history, there's been a variety of stone tools that have been created for different purposes. Some of the ones that I've created without any prior knowledge resemble some of those tools of the past. I have created a lot of blades. I've created a lot of hand blades and axes and knives and arrow points and dart points. A lot of different tools, you know, scrapers and saws and burrs, you name it, I've experimented with them. I've created them out of need, out of a necessity to employ some sort of tool to get a job done. One tool that I call kind of my mini Acheulean hand axe, Acheulean hand blade, or kind of my shark's tooth is this guy right here. Why these kind of remind me of like an Acheulean hand axe is they're relatively thin in the flake with a little bit more bulbous end on each one of them. It just gives you a little something to hold on to and ultimately work for any number of tools, whether it's game processing, scoring around a tree, cutting fibers. It is kind of that small little hand blade that can be a really, you know, simple multi-tool to throw in your pocket when you're heading out in the bush. But it's something that, as I was learning to flint knap, these stone flakes, and you can kind of see many of them are still smooth on that bottom side of that flake. There's not a lot of reduction. I'm just using the smoothness and the flat side of this flake and really reducing the top, maximizing this bulb, that bulb of percussion, kind of as a little handle. It's not too sharp, got a little cortex on each one. And this style of tool has kind of been one of my foundation stones, so to speak, when it comes to doing some primitive living out in the bush. Other blades of mine are, you know, one solid piece of stone, a fixed blade with some sort of wrapped handle. This one has changed shape and size over the years, but it's one that I've used for quite some time. It was definitely a lot longer and had a little bit more of a knife profile, but this is kind of what it's worked itself down into. Another style of blade is just that blade that's been hafted into some sort of handle, glued up with some pine pitch, some sort of sheath that can be carried off, you know, a loincloth or a belt, whatever the case may be. Even this style of blade is pretty effective. I've used these on plenty of game processing as well as tools out in the backcountry. You know, it can be napped from a small spall, it can be napped from a flake, and you know, they can go as small as something like this guy right here. That's just a couple inches, but it gives me the opportunity to have a knife on my person, more importantly a cutting tool. And then some of my knife kits, which actually have a little bit deeper pouch, from raw flakes to a flake that's just been reworked, kind of similar to my little mini Acheulean, a big old hand blade, a pressure flaker, a back blade with lots of cortex on it, and I can use my pouch as my flaking pad. This is essentially kind of what I would consider that Stone Age knife kit. You know, for a full knife kit, I can score cut, I can slice, I can saw, I can take things apart. It's a pretty good little thing to have, throw around your shoulder. However, when everything is said and done, I still go back to these little mini Acheulean hand blades. One of the most interesting pieces about utilizing this type of, you know, stone flake with a little bulb on the back end is it's really similar to the Mousterian industry, which was an industry that existed, you know, 160,000 to 40,000 years ago. And it was really popular with Neanderthals in Europe, also Homo Sapiens, and portions of Africa as well as Western Asia that also used this style of blade. Now, most of the flakes that were used in these Mousterian points and Mousterian blades were pulled off a core. It's different than a blade core where you're getting long, thin, single blades. This is pulled off a stone core that's giving you a little bit more rounder. It's giving you a little bit more of a bigger blade. You can see this isn't very thin, but I do get a big flake. I can put this on the end of a spear, I can hold it in the hand. It's kind of that, you know, tool that does a lot of different jobs. And it was a tool that was used quite extensively, you know, between Neanderthals as well as Homo Sapiens. Now, Neanderthals or Homo Sapiens, who came up with it first, don't really know. It did have a larger kind of usage with Neanderthals. It clearly had a presence in northern Africa with Homo sapiens as well as into Western Asia. It was a tool. It was something that was used quite extensively to put on the end of a spear, to use as a cutting tool, cutting bone or cutting hide. It was essentially a multi-tool. Bottom line, this style of, you know, future projectile or hand blade or cutting tool is really universal amongst Neanderthals as well as Homo Sapiens. And from my own personal experiences creating this style with a little bit more of a handle on that tail end where that bulb of percussion would be, it's turned into that multi-tool. It's a very simple tool to utilize. More importantly, it's a simple tool to make. All right. Let's use this guy. One good flake. Got my bulb. Let's see if you can reduce some of this down and give myself a good little pointed edge to work with. Now, some of the research that I did, I couldn't really see if there was any soft hammer percussion, something from like a billet, but there was some pressure flaking. So even with this cortex here, I can probably pressure flake a lot of that off. That's probably what I'll do. Just about it. It's pretty rough looking. There's not a lot of fanciness to it. It's essentially a flake that's been removed off a core, a little bit of maintenance and work around the edges to give it a profile, a cutting edge. It still has that smooth side. I took off one flake with my hammerstone just to get rid of that bulb just a little bit, but more importantly, you can still see that the flake scars on the top, on that dorsal side of the flake, which would have made it very easy to haft for an early styled spear point. More importantly, I still have that bulb of percussion that makes it easy to hold for any sort of processing of, you know, animal hides or plant fibers or cutting meat or scraping bone. It is a very simple stone tool to make, but that stone tool crosswalk between the Homo sapien world as well as that Neanderthal world all throughout Europe, all throughout Northern Africa and into Asia. So when I compare these two, this one here is definitely more of that Mousterian industry. This one here is kind of a combination of it, but I like to keep a little bit more cortex to really hold on to it. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist on this guy, but a lot of those Mousterian projectile points and blades were put on some very, you know, early formed of spears with some sort of wrapping or some sort of pine pitch glue. I can see just through my own exploration of creating stone tools for my usage, my little mini Acheulean hand axe is very similar to that Mousterian stone tool industry. It's fascinating to me, the simplicity of the tool, but also being able to understand how to get that result. Not only once, but again and again and again. And when we really think about it, it was shared. It was knowledge, skills, and abilities that were shared between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. And at one point, that Mousterian style flake, that Mousterian style projectile point hand blade came into existence, and it played a significant role in Neanderthals as well as Homo sapiens. And then when you fast forward all the way up to, you know, a couple thousand years later, there's me sitting there creating hand blades, creating tools that I could use on my adventures out in the bush, and almost replicating something exactly like they had 160,000 years ago. That's the Mousterian stone tool industry, shaping the existence of man and Neanderthals since the beginning of time. Appreciate you watching.